Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from RAU'S IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of RAU'S IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of the newspaper analysis from a civil service examinations perspective. So today we are going to discuss the Hindu Delhi edition dated 13th April 2022. The topics to be discussed have been displayed on your screen and the timestamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. So now let us begin with our first article, which is in relation to the El Nino. The topic reads, no El Nino is expected this year and therefore it will be a normal monsoon. This prediction has been done by the private weather agency Skymet with reference to the India. The immediate context of this article is, as it says, that the El Nino, which is responsible for the poor rainfall over India, is not expected to surface this year. Now, in this very regard, in today's session, we will look deeper into the analysis, into the concept that what is the concept of El Nino, how it affects the rainfall over India, what are its various impacts, and so on. As far as the UPSC scheme of syllabus is concerned, this topic directly falls under the General Treasury's Paper 1 section of Geography and the micro section which enlists important geophysical phenomena such as earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic activities, cyclone, etc. And not only the mains, even in the prelims, there are several questions which are asked from this particular theme. For example, in UPSC 2017, the question was asked with reference to the Indian Ocean Dipole. The question said that with reference to the IOD, sometimes mentioned in the news, while forecasting the Indian monsoon, which of the following statements are correct? The statement 1 is, IOD phenomena is characterized by a difference in sea surface temperature between tropical Western Indian Ocean and tropical Eastern Pacific Ocean. Statement 2 says that an IOD phenomena can influence an El Nino's impact on the monsoon. So here are the options given to you, 1 only, 2 only, both 1 and 2 or neither 1 or 2. Now as far as the answer of this particular question is concerned, the statement 1 is incorrect because IOD phenomena is not in relation to the Indian and Pacific Ocean, rather it is an intra-ocean phenomena between the West Indian Ocean and East Indian Ocean. So that is why statement 1 is incorrect and statement 2 is correct. That is why 2 only is the correct answer. However, in this very similar scenario, the question can also be asked over the phenomena of El Nino. And that is why it becomes very important that we must know that how El Nino is formed. Now, as far as the IOD, El Nino, La Nina, all these things are concerned, all these things are interaction between the atmosphere as well as oceans. There are certain changes, certain reversals in terms of temperature, pressure, etc., because of which the behavior of the atmospheric winds as well as oceanic currents change. And these changes have a wide-ranging climatic as well as weather impacts across the globe. So now let us understand that what is El Nino. But before understanding El Nino, first we should look at what is the normal situation in the Pacific Ocean. Now let us observe this particular area in great detail. Clear? I will explain you several concepts in this because once you go through and understand all these basic concepts, only then you will be able to understand the phenomena of El Nino. So first of all, there are several ocean currents. What is ocean currents? In layman language, ocean currents are like rivers flowing in the oceans. It is found in the oceans that there is a specific mass and volume of water which takes a particular direction and it has a speed greater than the surroundings. So therefore, just imagine the river flowing in the oceans, those are the ocean currents. Now ocean currents can be cold currents as well as warm currents depending upon the temperature, correct? So what happens is that on the western coast of the South America, we have a cold current, and that is why the border of the coast of Peru is cold in nature. Clear? Now the second important concept which you must understand is the primary circulations. Now primary circulations or the primary winds, for example tropical easterlies, subtropical westerlies are present across the globe. So in the tropical region, the winds which flow in this particular region are tropical easterlies, and that is why they flow in this particular direction in the northern hemisphere and in this particular direction in the southern hemisphere. Now, because the wind is flowing from east towards west, it will push the water, and the water in the Pacific Ocean will take the direction from east towards west. Correct? Because the winds are moving from east towards west, and under the influence of these winds, the water of the ocean will also move in the same direction. Now we know that this particular region is warm, and the winds are driving the warm water from the eastern Pacific towards the western Pacific, which will collect the warm water over this particular area. And now, because the water over here is warm, this water will start evaporating. Moreover, these winds have redistributed the heat also. They have taken the warm heat from this particular region and they have transported the heat to this region. So that means that the atmosphere near the coast of Australia has become warmer. And we know that the warmer air is lighter in nature, and that is why this region becomes the low pressure area from where the wind rises upwards. This uprising wind evaporates the moisture which is excessively present over this area because the ocean water was moving towards this direction, and there is a formation of clouds in this particular region, and hence the rainfall occurs over this region. And because here we were having the cold conditions, therefore it becomes relatively higher pressure region. And again, as we know that winds move from high pressure to low pressure, that is why the winds are moving from eastern Pacific towards the western Pacific. So this is presently the normal situation. And now you come to the Indian Ocean part. Now during monsoon, we know that land becomes excessively heated compared to the oceans. And now because the land is more heated, the low pressure region develops over the Indian landmass. In comparison to this, the oceans are relatively colder, and that is why here high pressure develops near the coast of Africa, and that is why the winds move from high pressure to low pressure region. These winds are responsible for bringing the moisture of the Arabian Sea as well as Bay of Bengal to the Indian landmass, and hence during the monsoonal season we get rainfall. Now what happens during El Nino is that these pressure conditions gets reversed. In the normal situation, as we have seen that the Pacific region, this particular region was having the high pressure region. But during El Nino, the water of the Peruvian coast becomes warmer. And now because the water has become warmer, so here the low pressure region will get developed. And because now here the low pressure region is developed, the winds which were earlier moving in this particular direction, the speed of these winds will weaken, and that is why it is said that the tropical easterlies get weakened. Now because the easterly winds are weaker during El Nino, it will not be able to transport this amount of water near to the Australian coast as it was doing before. And therefore, all the warm water will not reach up to the Australian coast, rather it will be accumulated over this particular region. And hence, now this Pacific region, which earlier was the high pressure area, now becomes the low pressure area. Correct? Now, if this region becomes the low pressure area, let us now see that how the winds will change in Indian Ocean. Earlier, the winds from this high pressure region was going towards the Indian landmass because it was having only one low pressure destination. But now the winds will be divided towards India also as well as towards Pacific also. So now the winds have bifurcated in two parts, and that is why the winds reaching to India will decrease. And if the winds reaching towards India will decrease, hence there will be the situation of droughts. Clear? Now let us see what will happen in Australia. Earlier Australia was having the low pressure region because the warm water was collected over here and the warm winds were also over here. But now because the warm water is in central and eastern Pacific, or the coast of Australia we will be having high pressure region, and Australian coast will also face droughts. So what has happened is that the cold water which was earlier present off the coast of Peru has now become warm. And this warming of the oceanic water near the coast of Peru is known as El Nino. So I hope that El Nino phenomena, the conceptual part is clear to you. So now let us look at some of the probable impacts. The first point is clear, as we have discussed it already, that the drought situations will prevail in India and Australia. Second, there might be floods in the Peru, because now we have discussed that of the coast of Peru, the conditions are warmer. And if the conditions are warmer, that means there will be excessive evaporation, as well as the cloud formation will take place over this region. The third is the disruption in the oceanic currents. Now, because the winds patterns have reduced their intensity and the pressure conditions have changed in the Pacific Ocean, it will disrupt the oceanic currents. Their velocity, their direction, their discharge will get disrupted. The fourth major impact might be economic in nature, that is the loss to fishing industry. Now let us understand this particular point. Now what happens is that fishing industry, for fishes to flourish over a certain region, they require the continuous supply of nutrients. During the normal condition, when the water was moving in this particular direction, and here we were having the cold conditions, here the upwelling of water was taking place, because the water was being transported from east towards west. This void which was created over here was filled by the water which was coming from submarine area, and this was the upwelling of water. The cold water which comes from below the oceanic surface has nutrients with them. But in El Nino situation, these conditions have reversed. Now there is no upwelling in this particular area, rather we have downwelling, and hence these areas are not receiving the adequate nutrients. And therefore there will be the mass death of fishes, and in turn it will lead to huge losses in the fishing industry. And the fifth point is that the heat and the nutrient transfer will also be affected. The effect of El Nino on nutrient transfer we have discussed already, and the heat transfer is self-explanatory, because now the winds will not be able to transport the excessive heat from this to this particular region, and that is why the heat transfer will be affected. So I hope the conceptual part of the El Nino, oceanic currents, primary circulations, as well as the multifold effects of the El Nino are clear to you. So now let us carry forward our discussion with our next article. This article has appeared at page number 9 in today's The Hindu Delhi edition, and this article presents a very different yet interesting perspective. It talks about the situations when law comes in conflict with the social customs. But the important thing is, when these social customs are linked towards the most vulnerable sections of a society, for example, the tribal groups, then the complexity and the level of intricacies of this particular conflict rises multifold. And that is where the wisdom, the experience comes into play, and you have to then find a certain balanced solution. As far as the UPSC scheme of syllabus is concerned, this particular topic falls under the General Studies Paper 1 as well as General Studies Paper 2. Now this particular article talks about the various provisions of the POXO Act as well as the Marriage Act, which denotes the minimum legal age to marry. For example, we all know that 18 years is the minimum age for the girl and 21 years is the minimum age for the boy. And on the other hand, the legal aspects, the constitutional protection given to the tribal groupings are in the form to protect and preserve their customary laws, etc. So there are several tribal groupings which follow the principles of marriage in, and they come in direct conflict with the general laws. That is why this topic falls under the General Studies Paper 1 in the sections of the salient features of the Indian society, as well as General Studies Paper 2 in the section of social justice, where we talk about the welfare schemes for the vulnerable sections, mechanisms, laws dealing with these vulnerable sections, etc. So now let us look at a detailed discussion on this article. First of all, the POXCO stands for the Protection of Children from the Sexual Offences Act 2012, and the basic objective, the basic aim of this act is to protect the children from the offences of sexual assault, sexual harassment, as well as pornography. It also provides for the establishment of the special courts for trials of such offences. However, the tribal population of India who follow their customary practices of marriage often run into the conflict with the law of the land and end into jail. Now, in this very sense and in continuation of this, let us also look at certain constitutional provisions for this. The first and the foremost important thing is that Article 13, which defines law, includes any ordinance, order, bylaw, rule, regulation, notification, as well as customs. Now, this word is very important. Having in the territory of India the force of law. That means that Article 13, that is the law, also includes the customary laws within its own definition. And that is why any law cannot defy the fundamental right of any citizen. So I hope that Article 13 is clear that law includes the customs also. Then comes Article 366, Clause 25, whereby it is defined that scheduled tribes mean such tribes or tribal communities or parts or groups within such tribes or communities as are deemed under Article 342 to be the scheduled tribes. Then we come to the 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution, whereby district council as well as regional councils can make laws for marriage and divorce and social customs among them. Further, the 6th schedule is applicable to 4 states: Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram. So that means that constitution on one hand includes the customs within the definition of law, and on the other hand it also provides freedom to the tribal communities, that is district council and regional councils, to prepare their own laws governing the marriage, divorce and social customs. Now these laws can come in conflict with the general law of the Indian mainland, and this is what this article is all about. So as we have discussed that there are certain customary practices of the tribal groupings whereby the age restriction is not followed. As soon as the girl or a boy enters into the puberty or they attain the adolescence, oftentimes they are married. And hence they come in conflict with several laws, for example, Prohibition of Child Marriage Act. And because of this conflict, many a times the boys of the tribal groupings are put into jail, whose ramifications you yourself can understand. So in this continuation now we should discuss that what are the various issues involved in the context of tribals. We will also discuss the future strategy, that what needs to be done in this very regard. The first and the foremost issue is that most of the tribal communities in India do not maintain their records. They do not have birth records, they do not have birth certificates, they do not have the records or certificates of their education, etc. Hence, it becomes very difficult to prove the age in the court of the law. Even if some arrest is made for a tribal boy, it becomes very difficult for the boy or his family to prove his age and prove his innocence. It might happen that because of certain reasons the arrest has been made of a boy, but that boy might be above 21 years of age. Despite this fact, it will become very difficult for him to convince the court of the law that yes, he is above 21 years, because the tribals do not have adequate birth records. The second important thing is that we know that the health services which reach the tribals are far below the levels of the health services which we get. We get regular polio drops, we get regular vaccinations, etc. But tribal communities do not get these services, and that is why they face low life expectancy. And because their life expectancy is so low, that is why they also follow the practices of early marriage. The third important reason is the lack of awareness. Despite the fact that you have made several laws for the India's mainland in order to protect the rights and everything, but the tribal communities lack awareness about these laws. They are not educated. They are not exposed to the social media. We are not reaching to them, we are not educating them, their literacy levels are not very high. So because of this lack of awareness, they do not know the provisions of various laws, and hence they face ramifications. Further, there are several laws, for example, POCSO Act, which compel the hospital authorities to report to the district administration of any birth which has been given by a woman who is less than 18 years of age. So, as soon as some women of the tribal group gives birth to a child but who is less than 18 years of age, it is directly reported by the hospital authorities to the district administration, and hence the arrest is made immediately. Now, in order to bypass these arrests, several tribal people do not go to the hospital at all, and because of which they prefer home deliveries. But we all know how dangerous these deliveries can be. It can increase the infant mortality rate as well as the maternal mortality rates. So these are the various issues which were involved in the context of the tribals as far as their customary laws, their marriages, and the laws which govern the India's mainland is concerned. But then the question rises that what needs to be done in this regard? The first and the foremost thing is that one size fits all approach is not valid and is not practical in India because of the diversity of religion, caste, creed, etc., which we have. And that is why the laws must recognize the diverse practices which are prevalent in certain sections of India's society. The second important thing is that the immediate arrests and tortures must be discouraged at all. The third thing is that we must spread the awareness about the laws as well as health. Now, the legal awareness is important to protect the tribal groups from unnecessary arrests. But the awareness about health is also very important because, yes, there might be certain customs which allow the tribal groups to marry their girls and boys at an age of, let's say, 13 to 14 years. But it is scientifically proven that the children which are born out of such young couple may face several health issues, and that is why, not by the force of law but by the force of persuasion, awareness must be generated about the health benefits of getting married after the age of 20 years. And in this very line, the fourth important step should be we must provide several health services. For example, contraceptives, condoms, etc. must be given to the tribal groupings so that even if they follow their customs to marry at early age, they do not give birth to the child. So these are the steps which can be taken in order to resolve this particular conflict. Now, this is the lead article which has appeared at page number 8. This article is in relation to the universal health care system, its utility, and the mechanisms through which we can enforce the universal healthcare ecosystem. As far as the UPSC scheme of syllabus is concerned, this topic finds its relevance under the section of General Studies Mains Paper 2 in the subsection of the social justice, because this section specifically mentions issues related to the development and management of the social sector and services relating to health. Now, this topic is also very important as evidenced from the previous year question asked in UPSC 2015 mains. The question said that the public health system has limitations in providing the universal health coverage. Do you think that the private sector could help in bridging the gap? What other viable alternatives would you suggest? So as you can see that this question is being asked typically from the theme of the universal health coverage as well as the mechanisms, the methodologies which can be taken into account to enforce and build this ecosystem. So that is why in this regard, in today's session we will discuss all the possible major dimensions associated with the universal health care. We will discuss the concept of the universal healthcare systems, what are the various approaches of the UHC, what is the need of UHC, what is the status of UHC in India, the associated challenges as well as the steps taken. So now let us begin the discussion with the basic concept of the universal health coverage. So as we all know that health is the basic human right which must be available to every person, and that should be regardless of the gender, creed, sex or the income levels, because health is a fundamental for a dignified life, and that is why the universal health coverage aims to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor in terms of accessibility and affordability of the healthcare services. The basic idea of the universal health coverage is that no one should be deprived of the quality health care for the lack of the ability to pay. It ensures that all the people must have access to the health services they need when and where they need them without any financial hardship. Because from the daily experiences, we obviously know the fact that many of the people, including us or around us, are forced to pay heavy fees in order to get better healthcare services. And it is not just about the fees. Many a times the rural folks, the people living in the rural areas, tribal areas, they do not have access to the healthcare services nearby their homes. And that is why they have to move to the urban centers, because most of the healthcare services are concentrated in the urban sectors. That is why the idea is not just related to the financial dimension, but it is also related to the spatial aspect. The spatial aspect, the temporal aspect, as well as the financial aspect. All the three components form the part of the universal health coverage. Moreover, the healthcare services can range from the health promotion to prevention, treatment, rehabilitation, as well as palliative care. That means that universal health coverage is not just restricted to one or two narrow aspects of the healthcare services. It encompasses the broader ecosystem of the entire healthcare services. And in the words of the enduring Bevan, he was the founder of the National Health Service in Britain. He said that no society can legitimately call itself civilized if a sick person is denied medical aid because of the lack of means. So, by his statement, you can understand the importance, the crucial nature of the universal health coverage, because it also now has a social aspect associated with it. And this very idea was also reflected in the Bhor Committee report in 1946. And this report made a case for India to create its own national health service type healthcare system on the lines of Britain. So, this is the basic concept, the basic idea of the universal health coverage. Now, there are mainly two approaches to the UHC. Now, as we have discussed, that the universal health coverage has the social aspects, financial aspects, spatial aspects, as well as temporal aspects, and that is why two major approaches to universal health coverage is either we should build an ecosystem which visualizes the healthcare ecosystem as a public service, or we can also ensure and build certain ecosystem based on the principles of social insurance. We can also build a third type of ecosystem whereby public service as well as social insurance both form the important and crucial components of that very ecosystem. So now let us look at that what is exactly mean by public service and how this approach can help us to attain the universal health coverage. Now, as we all know that there are certain public services which are freely available to everyone. For example, the police services which are there to ensure and maintain law and order. Similarly, the services of fire brigade or the services offered by public library. Now, for example, this fire brigade services, no one has to pay for it. If certain area or locality catches a fire, you can directly call to the fire services and the fire brigade services will be right there to the door of your houses. And similarly, it is said that why not we can build the healthcare services as a public services, whereby it can be provided as a free public service. The second important approach is the social insurance. Now let us understand that what is the difference between the social insurance and the private insurance. Now when you opt for the private insurance, the premium has to be paid by you. So, if we replicate this very model in the healthcare services, and ultimately if the burden of the premium falls on your shoulder, then obviously the situation will be returned back, because many poor people will not be able to pay the premium, and that is why they will be left out of the bracket of the private insurance. So that is why the social insurance is built on the principle that the expenditure of the insurance will be not borne by the individual or the patient, but the expenditure will be borne either by the government or by the society as a whole through the taxes which they pay. The social insurance allows private as well as the public provision of the healthcare, but the costs are mostly borne by the social insurance funds and not the patient. The insurance is compulsory, universal, and is mainly financed from the general taxation. Now, the model of the social insurance is also very much running in countries like Canada, Australia, as well as Taiwan. Australia, Canada, and Taiwan have a single non-profit agency which is built in the public interest, which is solely responsible for this social insurance in the healthcare ecosystem. However, there are countries, for example, Germany, which is following the model of the social insurance, but there is not a single non-profit agency, there are multiple agencies. But the idea is that the cost, the financial burden of these insurances must not fall on the patient. Now let us discuss that what is the basic need for the UHC. First is that throughout the globe, including countries like India and several Latin American as well as African countries, there is a high burden of the maternal mortality, infant mortality, mental, neurological, and substance use disorders. And these problems are so prevalent that it is very important to provide the services which can tackle these issues free of cost to every rural, urban, or tribal areas. The second important thing is we know that presently, with the changes in the lifestyle, our eating habits, our working habits, because of these lifestyle changes, there is a significant increase in the lifestyle diseases, for example, diabetes, hypertension. So, in the backdrop of rising burden of these diseases, it again becomes very important to provide free healthcare services in order to tackle these issues. Further, we also know that a healthy mind is a productive mind. And if we are able to provide good quality healthcare services free of cost to every individual, it will have a direct and proportional impact on the national productivity. Further, because it will reduce the out of pocket expenditure, which is mainly borne by the rural poor people, it will give a boost to their relative income, which in turn can be used in other productive areas, for example, providing the education, women empowerment, safety, etc. And the last point is that if any country claims to be a welfare state, then a universal health coverage is the hallmark of the government's commitment to improve the well being of all its citizens. And that is why the democratic government must work in order to attain the universal health coverage for all its citizens. Now we will come to the part of India and the status of the universal health coverage. First of all, we must know that there are certain challenges which are prevalent in India which is hindering the universal health coverage. There are certain issues. For example, first is the demand supply mismatch. Now, India has a strong population base of around 1.45 billion people. And you can imagine the amount, the demand of the healthcare services of this much strong demographic base. Further, we also know that majority proportion of this population is youth, but recently the proportion of the old age is also growing. Now, the youth population is facing the issues like depression, suicidal tendencies, substance abuse, etc. And the old age people are again facing the issues of depression because nowadays they are not provided adequate care. The joint families are breaking down to the nuclear families, and that is why the demand of the healthcare services is rising exponentially. But on the other hand, the supply side is so poor, hospitals are understaffed and underfinanced. And that is why there is a huge demand supply mismatch. The second issue rises from the regional divide. There is a huge rural urban divide. As we have already discussed, that most of the tertiary healthcare services are present in the urban areas. Moreover, the primary healthcare services which are there in the rural areas are not up to the mark. They are not having quality doctors, they are not having adequate machines, they are not having adequate finances. Our doctors are not ready to go and work in the rural or tribal areas. So there is a huge regional divide. And third is the financial angle. Now, as far as the India's expenditure is concerned, India has one of the lowest per capita health expenditure in the world. The government's contribution to the insurance stands at roughly 32%, and on the other hand, certain developed countries have this percentage as high as 80%. Moreover, around 80% of the Indians do not have any type of health insurance. So these are the major challenges which India face in order to achieve the objectives of universal health coverage. Despite these challenges, there are certain steps which have been taken in recent years in order to attain the objectives. The first is the launch of the National Health Policy 2017, which aims at providing the right to health and universal health services to every citizen. The second is that India has also launched massive routine immunization programs covering all the children across the country. Missions such as Mission Indradhanush, intensified Mission Indradhanush in part, reflects the government's effort under universal immunization program to reduce the child mortality as well as morbidity. The third is the Pradhan Mantri Dialysis Program has been launched to provide free services through dialysis units under free drugs and diagnostics program. In order to increase the accessibility towards the medicines, Amrit outlets have been established to provide subsidized medicines. Further, universal screening of the common non-communicable disease such as diabetes, hypertension, common cancers at the sub-center and primary health center has been initiated. And the latest and the greatest step which has been taken by the government of India is the Ayushman Bharat. Now we know that Ayushman Bharat have two components. The first is the health and wellness centers, which aims to transform 1.5 primary health care centers into health and wellness centers. And the second component is the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which aims to provide the health insurance to the people. And with the help of these two components through Ayushman Bharat, government has been making quality healthcare affordable and accessible for the crores of people in the country. So these are the broader steps taken by the government in order to achieve the objectives of the universal healthcare. Now let us revise this topic in brief once again. Now, first of all, we looked at the basic concept of the universal health coverage. We discussed that the basic idea of the universal health coverage is not restricted to the financial aspect only. It also has social dimension, spatial dimension, as well as temporal dimension. The basic idea of the universal health coverage is that every person of a country must be able to avail the quality healthcare services at a place and at a time whenever he or she requires. Then we looked at the basic financial approaches of the universal healthcare, which can be divided in a fashion that either we try to visualize the health services as the public services, or we must build an ecosystem based on the principles of social insurance. Then we looked that why are we talking so much about the universal health coverage? What is the need of the universal health coverage ecosystem? And in the last, we discussed the universal health coverage, its status, challenges, as well as the steps taken in the context of India. Now, this particular topic has appeared at the text and the context page. This topic is in relation to the cardless cash withdrawals at the ATMs. So, the context of this very topic is that recently RBI has announced that the cardless cash withdrawals at the ATMs will take across the country. Now, as you can see in this particular picture, it is a phone pay ATM. Now, this picture basically aims to signify that the cardless cash withdrawals can take place at ATM just with the help of UPI. Now let us understand that how this whole system will work. Now presently how we withdraw our cash from the ATM machines. Suppose this is an ATM machine and you go to the ATM machines, you insert your card in the cash dispensing machines, you enter your password and you withdraw the cash. Now the similar mechanism will be followed in the UPI based transaction also. However, cards will not be used for this. Now what will happen is, suppose you enter into an ATM and this is a cash dispensing machine. And as you will enter your basic details, here you will see various options which will allow you to withdraw your cash. And out of all these options, there will be one option which will be showing you as UPI. If you select this UPI transactions, then you will enter your amount. And once you enter the amount to be withdrawn, then a code, that is a QR code, will be shown on the machine. Then you will use the apps in your smartphones to scan this QR code and enter your UPI ID. Once you have entered your UPI ID or the password, you will be able to withdraw the cash which you want. So in all this procedure, you have not used the debit cards, and that is why it becomes the cardless transactions at the ATM. Now why RBI has come up with such a scheme? Because there must be certain benefits which are associated with the cardless transaction at ATMs, and therefore now let us look at some of those benefits. The first and the foremost benefit associated with this cardless based cash withdrawals at the ATM is enhancement of security. Presently, when we insert the ATM cards in the cash dispensing machines, there are the chances of card skimming and cards cloning. Now let us understand that what is card skimming and what is card cloning. Now what happens is that in those ATMs where there is lack of security cameras, or those ATMs which are located in far-flung areas, what fraudsters do is that they enter the ATM and they insert a device in the cash dispensing machines. Those devices are able to read the magnetic strip which is there in your ATM card. So as soon as you enter your ATM card in those card dispensing machines, this device reads the magnetic strip, and this process is known as card skimming. These devices are known as skimming devices. Once the information is extracted from your magnetic strip and has been stored in this particular device, this can be replicated and copied to some other cards. Now that means that all the details which are present in your cards has been copied to some other card, and this practice is known as card cloning. But the important thing is that both these practices, that is card skimming as well as card cloning, are taking place once you have entered your ATM cards. If there is some method that you don't have to enter your ATM cards into the machines, then there will be no chances of the card skimming as well as card cloning. And that is where the first and the foremost benefit of UPI based cash withdrawals stand. The second important thing is the interoperability, because presently we know that several UPI based apps are interoperable in nature, and they can be used to transfer the money from any bank to any bank, and similar will happen in the UPI based cash withdrawals also. The third important thing is competition. The reason being that whenever there is some kind of flexibility which is given in the market, for example, here a new methodology is coming up in the market, that is, you can withdraw your cash using the UPI IDs. So this flexibility encourages other players to enter into the financial market and thereby increase the competition in the market. An increase in competition will directly result into better customer services. And the last but not the least benefit is the overall financial inclusion, because presently we know that the mobile penetration as well as internet penetration has reached even to the rural as well as tribal areas. So in those areas also, if we know that presently the youngsters are using several apps on their smartphones, they can use those apps to withdraw their cash also. They need not to carry a different ATM card which also has high chances of losses. So in this very sense, this specific step can help us to attain our goals of financial inclusion too. Now let us look at some of the issues which are involved in the cardless cash withdrawals. The first issue is the cumbersome process because presently the existing mechanisms of the cardless cash withdrawals have, for example, the upper limit of the withdrawals. And this upper limit poses restrictions on the customers to withdraw their cash, and hence the process becomes very cumbersome. Because this UPI based card withdrawal system is a new step, and that is why it is still to be seen that how many banks will immediately jump into tapping the potential of this particular market. So yes, as far as the present situation is concerned, there is certain skepticism associated with its scalability. The third issue is of security because several experts believe that yes, presently the cyber fraudsters are being using the practices like card skimming and card cloning. But what is the guarantee that once this practice is replaced by using the UPI based cash withdrawals, so isn't there any possibility that those UPI passwords can also be hacked? Because cyber attacks in form of certain softwares or malwares are rising to such an extent that in near future it might not be very difficult to process or to hack your UPI IDs or passwords. So yes, again there are high chances of security breaches in the future also, and that is why we need to be very and need to take steps to ensure that these type of practices can be reduced to minimum. And the fourth issue is that presently we use debit cards, and debit cards has several functions. It is a multi-purpose card. It has several functions which goes beyond withdrawing the cash. For example, these can be used in the foreign market. But presently, as far as the UPI technology is concerned, the UPI, it is still unclear and it will take time to evolve this UPI based cardless cash withdrawal ecosystem to reach to the level of the debit cards ecosystem. So now moving towards this particular topic which has appeared on the text and the context page. This topic is in relation to the presidential election, the manner as well as the constitutional provisions which govern the presidential election in our constitution. This topic has come in the context that because the tenure of the present president Mr. Ramnath Kovind is about to over, and that is why new candidate will be selected. So in this backdrop, let us now go through the important constitutional provisions which govern the presidential election in India. First of all, we should know that who elects the president. The president in India is not directly elected by the people but indirectly elected. Now, what do we mean by indirect election? Indirect election is that it is not the normal citizens of India which go. You and I do not participate in the presidential election directly. However, the people whom we have already elected in our states or at the central level, they in turn elect the president. So that is why it is an indirect election. President is elected by the people who are elected by us. So that is why Article 54 of the Indian Constitution says that the electoral college is to be constituted to elect the president. And the composition of this electoral college is elected members of both the houses of parliament. Now, this is to be remembered, this is very important. Members of both the houses of parliament, that is Rajya Sabha as well as Lok Sabha, take part in it. But not all the members of the houses of parliament take part. Only those members who are elected take part in these houses. That means nominated members do not participate in presidential election. Similarly, the elected members of the legislative assemblies of all the states and also of Delhi as well as Puducherry. So I am again repeating it. The composition of the electoral college consists of the elected members of both the houses of parliament, elected members of all the state assemblies, as well as members of Delhi and Puducherry. Now comes the tenure of the president. So this is mentioned in Article 56 of our constitution. Article 56 says that the president shall hold office for a term of 5 years. So this means the tenure of a president is 5 years from the date on which he enters upon his office. However, there is one very important condition attached to this tenure. It says that notwithstanding anything, President continues to hold the office until his successor enters upon his office. That means, for example, because of certain reason, let's assume that the 5 years have passed of the present president, but the election for the next president has not taken place, or next president is not yet elected and he is not yet to enter upon his office. So until and unless the successor enters upon his office, the present president will continue to hold his office. It may be beyond 5 years also. However, generally the election of the next president takes place before the tenure gets over of the present president. It is mentioned in the Act. According to the Presidential and Vice Presidential Elections Act 1952, the notification calling to the election of the office of the President can be issued by the Election Commission on any day within the period of 60 days before the expiry of the term of the office of the outgoing President. That means that if the tenure of the present President is about to get over by 30th July, then within 60 months preceding this 30th July, that is 30th May to 30th July, Election Commission can conduct the election of the President. Article 324 of the Indian Constitution tells about the authority which can conduct the election to the office of President as well as Vice President. And as per this article, the authority to conduct the elections to the office of President is vested in the Election Commission of India. Moreover, the election which we are talking about of the President takes place with the system of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote as well as secret ballot. Now let us come to the eligibility criteria of the President. Article 58 mentions the eligibility conditions to contest the election to the office of President. There are 4 conditions. First, he must be a citizen of India. Second, he must have completed 35 years of age. Third, he must be eligible to be a member of Lok Sabha. Now this is very important because in questions this word generally gets replaced by Rajya Sabha. So you need to remember that he must be eligible to be the member of Lok Sabha. And the fourth, he should not be holding any office of profit under the government of India or the government of any state. Now, office of profit is not defined by the Indian Constitution. However, the Constitution again says that the offices of the President, Vice President, Governor, Minister of the Union or any state will not be considered as office of profit, and the person who is presently at any of these posts is eligible to contest the elections. So I hope the eligibility criteria for the election of the President is clear to all of you. Now we'll move towards the manner of the election of President and the value of votes. First of all, we must understand that whenever general election takes place, one person has one vote. For example, if you vote, you will have one value. If I'll vote, I'll have one value. So one person has one vote. But same is not the case during the presidential elections. Because we have already discussed that in presidential elections, common people do not participate. Rather, they are the MLAs or the MPs who participate. So the vote given to every MLA or MP differ. And there is a specific formula to calculate the vote of one MLA as well as MP. For example, the value of one MLA is calculated as per this formula, that is, the total population of that very state of which the MLA belongs. It used to be divided by the total number of MLAs. So now because the population of each state vary, that is why the value of MLAs of different states will also vary. That is very obvious. Now come to the value of the vote of MPs. The formula is total number of votes which are assigned to MLAs divided by total number of MPs. Now when MPs are to be considered, the value of the votes of MPs are to be considered, it remains same of Rajya Sabha MP as well as Lok Sabha MP. The reason being, the total number of votes assigned to the MLAs will remain same as well as the total number of MPs including the Rajya Sabha as well as Lok Sabha will remain same. So here the numerator and denominator are both same, and that is why the value of the MPs are same, but the value of the votes of MLAs differ because the population of every state differs. In this context, 84th Constitutional Amendment Act 2001 is very significant because it provided that until the relevant population figures for the census after the year 2026 is published, the population of the states for the purpose of the calculation of the value of the votes of presidential election shall mean the population as ascertained at the 1971 census. This means that in the numerator, which we are talking, that total populations of the state, so the population of the state will not be considered as the present level of populations. It is to be considered the population levels as per 1971 census until and unless new census after the year of 2026 is published. Now come to the nomination stage. Before election, there is a nomination, and the candidates who intend to stand in the election is to be nominated. And that nomination has to be signed with the list of 50 proposers as well as 50 seconders. And these proposers and seconders can be anyone from the total of 4,896 members of the Electoral College. That is the total number of MPs and MLAs in India. And once the election is done, here first past the post system is not followed. For securing the victory, an important rule exists. The Election Commission totals up all the valid votes cast by the Electoral College through the paper ballots, and to win, the candidates must secure 50% of the total votes plus 1. So that means it is not just who has secured the maximum votes, whether it is 10% or it is 90%, he will be elected as a president. No. The winning candidate must secure 50% of the total votes casted plus 1. So this was all about the election of the president as well as the constitutional provisions. I hope you have understood all these provisions in a very good manner, and you will be able to produce and attempt correct answers in your real examination. So now is the time for the question of the day. The question from yesterday's DNS was, you were given 3 statements and you have to find the correct statement out of the given 3 statements. Statement 1 was, Niti Aayog has launched the State Energy and Climate Index Round 1. Statement 2, State Energy and Climate Index Round 1 ranks the state's performance on 3 parameters: large states, small states and union territories. The second statement is incorrect because there are 6 parameters. The statement 3 says that parameters for the index have been devised to propel India's goal for climate change and clean energy transition. So statement 1 and 3 are correct, and therefore option D is the correct answer. The question from today's DNS is in relation to the El Nino. The question asks, which of the following statements are true during the El Nino event? Statement 1, the water off the Peru coast becomes hot. Statement 2, India experiences more than normal rainfall during monsoon. Options are A, 1 only, B, 2 only, C, both 1 and 2, D, neither 1 nor 2.